Imagine a company so powerful it ruled an entire subcontinent, maintained its own army, printed its own money, and even made kings bow. This wasn't a government, it was a corporation, the British East India Company, often called the company that built an empire. It was not a government, it was a business. This business had its own army, larger than that of many nations. It waged wars and signed treaties with kings and emperors. It collected taxes from millions of people. It administered justice, minted its own coins, and shaped the destiny of a subcontinent. This was the reality of the British East India Company, from merchants to masters, the first multinational corporation to rule a nation. The story begins on the last day of the year 1600. In London, 218 merchants and investors gathered. They had a bold plan. They wanted to break into the lucrative spice trade, dominated by the Dutch and the Portuguese. They petitioned Queen Elizabeth I for exclusive rights. She granted a royal charter, creating the Governor and Company of Merchants of London trading into the East Indies. Everyone shortened it, the East India Company. Their goal, sail east to buy spices, silks, other exotic goods, and sell them back in Europe for massive profit. Their initial focus, not India, the real prize, the Spice Islands, what we now call Indonesia. Places like the Banda Islands, the only source of nutmeg and mace. Spices worth more than their weight in gold. But the Dutch were already firmly in control, better funded, more experienced, utterly ruthless. After bloody encounters, including the Amboina massacre of 1623, the British realized they couldn't compete in the Spice Islands. They needed a new market. They turned westward toward Mughal India. The India they found was a formidable power, ruled by the mighty Mughal Empire, one of the richest of its time. The company's first permanent trading post was established in Surat on the west coast of India in 1630. This factory wasn't a place of manufacturing. It was a fortified warehouse and residence, a base where factors could live, store goods, conduct trade. Surat linked India to the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, an ideal starting point. From here they bought Indian textiles, cotton, calico, sold in London and traded onward for East Indies spices. Over decades, the company expanded along India's coastline. In 1639, it established Fort St. George, which grew into Madras, Chennai. In 1668, Mumbai, was transferred from the crown, part of Catherine of Braganza's dowry. In 1690, a base in Bengal grew into Kolkata, Madras, Bombay, Calcutta, pillars of company power in the three presidencies. At first, commercial islands, warehouses for cotton, silk, indigo dye, saltpeter, tea, and living quarters for young Britons chasing fortune, the future nabobs. Life was hard, disease rampant, climate harsh, cultural isolation profound. As the 18th century dawned, posts shifted from simple warehouses to fortified compounds, high walls, mounted cannons, trained security, defense against pirates and bandits, and a response to political change as the Mughal Empire fractured and local rulers grew assertive. To protect investments and trade routes, they needed more than walls. They needed soldiers. This marked the first step from trading company to military power. A private army began to take shape, a tool that would soon reshape a subcontinent. The 18th century brought profound change to India. The great Mughal Empire, stable for nearly 2 centuries, entered terminal decline. After the death of Aurangzeb in 1707, the central government in Delhi weakened. Provincial governors, Nawabs, Subadars asserted independence. Powerful states emerged, Marathas in the west, Sikhs in the north, rulers of Hyderabad in the south. India became a fragmented patchwork, each vying for supremacy, chaos and opportunity. The British East India Company, secure in coastal forts, watched rivals fight. Company directors in London and ambitious men on the ground learned the game of Indian politics. They offered loans and military assistance to local princes in exchange for commercial privileges and political influence. If one ruler refused, they found a rival to support, divide, and rule. A key part was the private army, led by British officers, composed mostly of Indian sepoys, drilled in European techniques, flintlocks, disciplined volleys. Better equipped and more disciplined than many local forces, it became the ultimate tool of persuasion. When diplomacy and bribery failed, military force secured commercial interests. They weren't alone. The French East India Company under Dupleix mastered political military strategy. Anglo-French rivalry, global and fierce in India, honed British skills and their sepoy army. The single most important event in the company's rise to power occurred in 1757. The location was Plassey, a mango grove, in the humid plains of Bengal, a rich province with its capital at Murshidabad, a major centre for textile production and trade. The young Nawab, Siraj-ud-Dowlah, wary of the company's growing military presence and abuses, marched on Calcutta in 1756 and captured it. The company dispatched a force from Madras under Robert Clive. Clive had about 800 Europeans and 2,200 sepoys. Siraj's army was around 50,000 with heavy cavalry and French-manned artillery. On paper, an easy victory for the Nawab. However, Clive engaged in a conspiracy, a secret deal with Mir Jafar, one of Siraj's most powerful generals. Clive promised to make him Nawab if he betrayed his master and held his forces back. It was a plan built on treachery. On June 23rd, a sudden monsoon soaked the battlefield. Company troops kept their powder dry. Much of the Nawabs was ruined. When fighting resumed, disciplined volleys told. Crucially, Mir Jafar's large contingent stood idle. Realizing the betrayal, Siraj panicked and fled. His leaderless army collapsed. Plassey was less a heroic battle than an orchestrated coup. Clive installed Mir Jafar as puppet Nawab. In return came trading rights, vast lands and huge payments, making the company and Clive fantastically wealthy and giving control over Bengal's revenues. After Plassey, in 1757, the East India Company's nature changed forever. It began a century of direct and indirect rule over ever-expanding territories. Company Raj. From Bengal, the company used military might and wealth to defeat or subordinate Indian powers. The Marathas, the Sultans of Mysore, Tipu Sultan, and the Sikhs. It governed directly in some areas. In others, it controlled rulers through treaties, creating dependent princely states. By the early 19th century, its private army swelled to over 200,000 men. A for-profit company responsible to shareholders, yet acting as a state for millions. Primary objective: maximize revenue. It took over Mughal systems and made them more rigorous, extracting vast sums from the peasantry. This wealth-funded armies paid dividends and financed Britain's tea trade with China. India paid for its own conquest and administration. Extraction devastated the local economy. Closed workshops, high taxes forced cultivation of indigo and opium instead of food staples. When rains failed in 1770, famine killed an estimated 10 million. Drought struck, but harsh revenue policy and lack of relief made it far worse. India's textile industry suffered as cheap Manchester cloth flooded markets. Weavers and artisans were driven into poverty. Recognizing contradictions, Parliament began regulating the company and appointed a Governor-General. Governors like Lord William Bentinck introduced reforms: abolition of sati, suppression of thuggee, English education and British legal codes. Modern infrastructure, roads, canals, railways, laid foundations for modern India. But these were always secondary to the company's primary mission: to make money. By the mid-19th century, a century of company rule had bred deep resentment. Princes lost kingdoms, landowners' estates, peasants bore heavy taxes. Aggressive expansion, the doctrine of lapse, and missionary activity stoked fears of cultural and religious erosion. The trigger was the Patton 1853 Enfield rifle. Rumours spread that cartridges were greased with beef tallow or pork lard, offensive to Hindus and Muslims. Handling them was a grave insult, seen as a deliberate attempt to defile faith and force conversion. Trust collapsed. At Meerut, sepoys who refused were humiliated and imprisoned. The next day, comrades revolted, freed prisoners, killed British officers, and marched to Delhi. There they proclaimed Bahadur Shah Zafar leader of the rebellion. The uprising spread rapidly across northern and central India. Not just a mutiny, a popular revolt. Peasants and princes joined. Company officials attacked, records burned, garrisons besieged in Lucknow, Kanpur, and Delhi. The rebellion saw extreme violence on both sides. Rebels massacred British men, women, and children, most infamously at Kanpur. British reprisals were savage. Villages burned, suspects executed without trial, sometimes tied to cannon muzzles and blown apart. After a long siege, Delhi fell in September 1857. Bahadur Shah Zafar was captured, tried for treason, and exiled to Burma. The Great Uprising, called by many the First War of Independence, was crushed, but it shook British power to its core. It set in motion the end of company rule and a new era under the British Crown. The Great Uprising was the death knell for the East India Company, exposing the flaws of a profit-driven corporation governing an empire. In August 1858, Parliament passed the Government of India Act, transferring company territories, administration and armed forces to the British state. The Board of Directors and Court of Proprietors were replaced by the India Office. In India, the Governor-General became Viceroy, representative of Queen Victoria. Its armies, courts and revenue machinery were absorbed into the British Raj. The company became a ghost of itself. It lingered briefly as a commercial body managing tea, but on June 1, 1874, the Stock Dividend Redemption Act dissolved the once mighty corporation. Its legacy endured, reshaping India's political and economic map, creating a centralized state and tying the subcontinent's destiny to the British Empire. The company's era was over. The British Raj would last another 90 years. The British East India Company may have been dissolved in 1874, but its legacy echoes still, the ultimate example of corporate power run amok. It pioneered the modern multinational, a head office dictating far-off lives, a global supply chain, relentless focus on shareholder value, a timeless cautionary tale of overreach. In India, the legacy is everywhere. Calcutta, Bombay, Madras, major metropolises, the railways, and routes of the army, civil service, and legal system. Yet modernizing legacies are intertwined with exploitation, silent looms, famine worsened by revenue policy, and a proud land subjugated by a trading firm. In an age of powerful corporations, the company's rise and fall is more relevant than ever. We see debates today about the power of tech giants, the influence of pharmaceutical companies, the role of multinationals in developing countries. The questions are familiar. When does a company become too powerful? What are the responsibilities of a global business? Where should the line be drawn between commerce and governance? The East India Company shows what happens when that line is erased. Profit fused with power, checked only by rebellion and the state. From a small group of London merchants to masters of India, its rise and fall remind us how greed, power and politics can shape history itself. For when a company begins to act like a state, it is a warning that something has gone profoundly wrong.